A black girl stepped quietly into Brooklyn High School. Her name was Aaliyah Carter, and she came in hoping to finish her senior year without drawing any attention, just another face in the crowd. But before she could even memorize her locker combination, Madison Mitchell, white, flawless, and ice-cold, decided Aaliyah would be her new target. It started with laughs that felt like knives, whispers that stung more than words should, and then came the public humiliation, loud, cruel, and calculated. Madison thought she was about to pull off her grand finale in front of the whole school, everyone ready with their phones, waiting for Aaliyah to crack. But what none of them knew was that Aaliyah wasn't just some quiet new kid from Chicago. They'd messed with the wrong girl. Aaliyah had grown up in her dad's gym, trained for years in discipline, strength, and self-control. And today, they were going to find out exactly what that meant. The yellow school bus pulled up in front of Brooklyn High, and kids spilled out, loud and full of energy. Aaliyah was the last one off, clutching her backpack straps like a lifeline. She kept her head down, trying to dodge the curious looks she'd gotten used to. As a black girl who had transferred from school to school, she recognized those stares instantly. Every place she went, it was the same. People didn't just see a new student, they saw someone different, someone who didn't quite fit in. In a mostly white school like this, her skin made her stand out before she even said a word. She glanced up at the big red brick building, the dull windows, crowded hallways. It all felt familiar, like the last school and the one before that. Nothing surprising, nothing welcoming either. Aaliyah had moved enough to learn one rule that never failed. Stay quiet, keep your head down, don't draw attention. That was how she stayed safe. Her hands tightened around the backpack straps as she merged into the flow of students heading inside. She walked carefully, avoiding contact, not meeting anyone's eyes. Still, she could feel the stares, quick and sharp, full of curiosity and judgment. Whispers floated past her, quiet but cutting. She knew she was being dissected without a word, every piece of her under a microscope. And it hurt. Not loudly, not in a dramatic way, just a deep, quiet ache. Because Aaliyah knew she couldn't stop the way people looked at her. It had always been this way. A black girl trying to find her place where she clearly didn't belong. All she wanted was to get through this last year in peace. No drama, no attention, no friendships, just make it to graduation and leave. But she had no idea that everything she'd planned, her silence, her invisibility, was about to be torn apart. What was coming would test her more than anything before, and it would flip her whole world upside down. And it all started in this still, silent moment, her very first day at Brooklyn High. As Aaliyah passed a row of light blue lockers, scanning for her number, she sensed something shift. The hallway buzz quieted. Conversations turned into murmurs. Students near her subtly stepped aside, almost like they were making room for someone. Aaliyah didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel it. Someone important had arrived. Madison Mitchell stood out even before you saw her. Tall, blonde, perfectly put together in an expensive plaid dress that hugged her figure like it was tailored just for her. Every step she took oozed confidence, almost like she dared the world to challenge her. She wasn't just the rich, popular girl. Madison ran Brooklyn High. Her influence stretched beyond classrooms and lunch tables. She didn't walk alone, either. On her right was Chelsea, with flaming red hair and sharp, watchful eyes. On her left, Olivia, a bit shorter, with deep brown hair and a quiet way of gathering every bit of gossip without even trying. These girls didn't just have money or looks, they had power. And in a school like this, that made them untouchable. What really set the tone at Brooklyn High wasn't just Madison Mitchell and her crew, it was her older brother, Zach Mitchell, the golden boy of the school and star quarterback. Zach was tall and built like a linebacker, always rocking his signature number 12 jersey. He had that easygoing smile that made people swoon, but his eyes carried a quiet arrogance, like he already knew he ruled the place. Right by his side, like a troublemaking shadow, was Luke Collins. Luke was wiry, with a smirk that screamed mischief, and eyes that sparkled with the thrill of chaos. No one knew exactly how tight he was with Zach or Madison, but it was clear he was always around when things went sideways. He didn't need a reason to stir the pot. He just liked the power it gave him. Madison moved through the hallway like she owned it, and honestly, she kind of did. Whispers followed her every step. Some people admired her, others feared her, but everyone paid attention. If you were new, you learned fast. Survival at Brooklyn High meant knowing your place, and Madison had already decided hers was above everyone else. Aaliyah only glanced at Madison for a second, but that was enough. Madison's eyes locked on hers, cold and sharp, sending a message without a single word. Aaliyah got it loud and clear. She was the outsider. Madison had drawn an invisible line, and Aaliyah wasn't supposed to cross it. Aaliyah turned back to her locker and focused on getting it open, pretending not to notice. But deep down, she felt a chill run through her. No matter how much she tried to stay under the radar, it was clear that this school wouldn't let her go unnoticed. She closed her locker quietly, adjusted her backpack, and headed to her first class. But something in her gut told her that this was only the beginning. Madison Mitchell wasn't the type to let things go. That one glance had lit a fuse, and Aaliyah had unknowingly stepped into something much bigger than she'd realized. At Brooklyn High, power didn't wear a crown, but it sure had a name, and that name was Madison Mitchell. The first class dragged on. Aaliyah had chosen a seat tucked in the back corner, hoping to stay out of everyone's way. She kept her head down, just listening, observing. But no matter how hard she tried to avoid it, she could still feel Madison's icy glances cutting across the room, calculating as if she were already setting something in motion. For Madison, Aaliyah's arrival was a golden opportunity. Every school year brought in new faces, and every year Madison picked someone to remind everyone who was in charge. Aaliyah, with her quiet presence and different background, was the perfect pick. Not too loud, not too weak, just enough mystery and silence to catch attention. Madison didn't go for easy targets. Breaking someone like Aaliyah, someone who seemed calm and composed, would send a stronger message than picking on someone already on the edge. If she could make Aaliyah crack, the whole school would know that nobody stood a chance against her. By the end of the first class, the whispers had already started trailing behind Aaliyah. At first, it was small stuff. "That's the new girl from Chicago," or "She seems kind of off, doesn't she?" But it didn't take long for those whispers to twist into cruel comments. Aaliyah could hear them clearly, even if they pretended not to be talking to her. "What's with those clothes?" someone said just loud enough. "Do people from Chicago all dress like that?" another voice added. "Bet she can't even form a proper sentence." Aaliyah stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear, but her grip on her pencil tightened. She'd been through this before, people mocking her for her skin color, for her background, or just for being new. She knew better than to react. Giving them anything, even a look, would only make things worse. Across the room, Madison watched, her lips curling into a subtle smirk. Aaliyah's silence only fueled her confidence. To Madison, quiet meant weak, and that was exactly what she needed. She leaned over and whispered something to Chelsea and Olivia, who immediately burst into fake, exaggerated laughter, loud enough to turn heads. The whole room seemed to tilt toward their noise. In the middle of the chaos, Aaliyah sat still. She forced herself to breathe slow, keeping her chest from tightening too much. Every part of her wanted to disappear, but she knew that wasn't an option anymore. Something told her that no matter how quiet she stayed, Madison had already decided. Aaliyah wasn't going to have a peaceful year. Aaliyah knew staying quiet was her only real option in that moment. What she didn't realize, though, was that her silence wasn't calming things down. It was doing the exact opposite. To Madison, Aaliyah's lack of reaction wasn't just annoying, it was insulting. It felt like a personal challenge, like Aaliyah was daring her without saying a word. Madison wasn't used to being brushed off, especially not by someone new. Her ego couldn't handle it. She narrowed her eyes at Aaliyah, curiosity flickering behind her frustration. This wasn't just another girl she could push around. Aaliyah had now become something different. She was a puzzle Madison felt compelled to solve, a challenge she had to conquer. When the bell rang for break, Aaliyah stood up quietly and walked out of the classroom. On the outside, she looked calm and composed. But inside, her thoughts were racing. It was clear now, this school wasn't going to let her slip by unnoticed. Madison had picked her, and Aaliyah could feel that whatever this was, it wouldn't end with silence. The more Aaliyah ignored her, the more irritated Madison became. She wasn't someone who could stand being dismissed, and she definitely couldn't stand someone acting like her power didn't matter. Aaliyah's quietness, instead of keeping her safe, had accidentally poked the bear. It lit a fire in Madison, the kind of deep competitive instinct that needed to prove something. And she was ready to do whatever it took to make her point. Lunch at Brooklyn High wasn't just about eating. It was a social battlefield, where you sat, who you talked to, who you ignored. Everything mattered. The unspoken rules of power were loudest here. Madison always sat at the center, surrounded by her loyal circle, acting like the whole cafeteria was her stage. Today, Aaliyah was the show. As Aaliyah stepped into the lunchroom, she could feel the eyes on her. There was something strange in the way people were watching her. Not just curiosity, but anticipation, like they were waiting for something to happen. She quietly made her way to the farthest table in the room, the one nobody else ever chose. It was tucked away, distant, usually meant for students who didn't fit in. But for Aaliyah, it felt like the safest place to avoid trouble. But today wasn't going to be safe. Madison had already made up her mind. She was going to break Aaliyah's silence. She wasn't the kind of girl who waited patiently, and Aaliyah's quiet defiance had gotten under her skin. Madison leaned slightly toward Chelsea and Olivia, giving them a quick, subtle nod. Chelsea stood right away, and the two girls began walking toward Aaliyah's table with fake casualness. A moment later, Madison followed, carrying a full cup of juice in her hand. Her steps were slow, confident, every move calculated to show who was in charge. Aaliyah kept her head down, eating quietly, but her instincts were on high alert. She heard the footsteps approaching before she saw anything, and when she finally looked up, her eyes met Madison's sharp, daring stare. The room seemed to go still. Conversations stopped. Everyone was watching. The silence got so thick that Aaliyah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She knew what was about to happen. She also knew she wasn't going to give Madison the satisfaction of a reaction. No anger, no fear. She would not play that game. Madison stopped right in front of her table, a smug little smile curling on her lips. She leaned in and said, loud enough for the whole cafeteria to hear, "Wow, sitting all alone? What, couldn't find anyone to sit with?" Chelsea and Olivia giggled, and the students nearby let out some awkward laughter, unsure if they were supposed to join in or just stay quiet. Aaliyah didn't say a word. She just stared back at Madison, calm and unshaken. Madison let out a soft laugh, then accidentally tipped her cup. The deep red juice spilled out instantly, soaking Aaliyah's tray, ruining her lunch, and splashing across the table. Madison stood up straight, putting on a fake expression of surprise. "Oh, no," she said. her voice syrupy and insincere. "I'm so sorry." "I spilled it." Laughter exploded across the cafeteria. Every head turned, eyes locked on Aaliyah, all expecting a scene, tears, yelling, something dramatic. But Aaliyah didn't give them that. She just sat there for a beat, then calmly set her spoon down on the tray. Her face didn't show a trace of anger or fear. With quiet control, she stood up, picked up her now juice-soaked tray, and walked toward the trash can in the back of the room. Her movements were smooth, without hesitation. She dumped the whole tray and turned back without looking around. The laughter died fast. The air shifted. No one said a word. That cool, steady calm Aaliyah carried threw the entire room off balance. It wasn't weakness. It was something no one could quite read. She returned to grab her backpack, glanced at Madison, and there it was again, that unsettling stare. Not angry, not scared, just ice cold. It wasn't the kind of calm that meant backing down. It was the kind that made people second-guess themselves. Madison didn't know what to make of it. For the first time, she felt like the rules of the game she usually controlled so well had changed without warning. Something in her gut twisted. Aaliyah wasn't like the others, and Madison could feel it in her bones. She'd expected tears, outrage, humiliation, but Aaliyah gave her nothing, and that nothing was more powerful than any meltdown could have been. As Aaliyah walked out of the cafeteria, silence followed her like a shadow. No one dared to speak, but everyone felt the shift. Madison Mitchell had started something, but now Aaliyah Carter had taken control in a way no one saw coming. That afternoon, Madison sat back at her usual table, posture perfect, expression blank. But inside, her heart was racing. Something wasn't right. She wasn't used to this kind of reaction. Normally, her targets cracked under pressure, yelling, crying, storming off. That was how it always went. That was how she kept her grip on the school. But Aaliyah didn't break. She didn't even blink. That quiet strength, that unshaken poise, it rattled Madison more than she wanted to admit. For the first time, she didn't feel in control. Whispers had started spreading through the cafeteria again. Not loud, but just enough for Madison to hear the shift. The looks that used to land on her with admiration were now different. Cautious, curious. Like people were trying to figure out if maybe, just maybe, the Queen of Brooklyn High had finally met her match. Madison looked around. Eyes darted away when she met them. Even Chelsea and Olivia looked uneasy. Olivia buried her face in her phone. Chelsea offered a nervous smile like she wasn't sure how to react either. Everything felt off. The mood, the air, the people. It had all changed. And Madison hated it. She wasn't used to being questioned, even silently. That wasn't how it worked. Without a word, Madison grabbed her bag and stood. Chelsea and Olivia jumped up to follow her, but she didn't wait. She walked fast through the hall, her eyes locked on the row of lockers ahead. Every step echoed with tension. This school had always been her stage, and she had ruled it by making sure no one could challenge her authority. But now, that dominance felt fragile. Aaliyah hadn't tried to take it, but somehow, without doing anything, she'd shaken it. Chelsea and Olivia eventually caught up, trailing quietly behind. After a few moments, Chelsea glanced at Madison and carefully said, "She's not like the others, huh?" Madison's jaw tightened. The words hit her hard, confirming what she didn't want to admit. Aaliyah wasn't just another quiet girl. She was something else, something that made Madison feel unsure for the first time. Madison stopped walking, spun around, and faced Chelsea with a cold stare. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice sharp. Chelsea flinched, waving her hands quickly, trying to backpedal. "I just meant she's different, that's all." But Madison had already heard it. Different. And that difference was the very thing she couldn't control, and that terrified her. I just mean, maybe she's faking it, like acting all tough, but deep down, she's probably scared. Chelsea's voice was uncertain, like she was trying to convince herself as much as Madison. Madison tilted her head, eyes locked on Chelsea, then gave a small shake of her head, a dry smirk forming. "No," she said quietly. "That's the problem. She's not scared." Even Madison was caught off guard by her own words. Saying it out loud made it feel more real, and she hated that. Admitting someone wasn't afraid of her felt like letting go of the control she had always held over everyone. Olivia, sensing the tension, jumped in quickly. "Hey, maybe she just got lucky this time. Give it a day or two. Everything'll go back to normal. Nobody stands up to you for long." Madison let out a soft, bitter laugh, eyes staring down the hallway like she was searching for something to steady her. But the storm inside her only got louder. Aaliyah Carter, the quiet girl from Chicago, was starting to feel like more than just a random new student. Her silence, her calm, that unreadable look in her eyes, it was starting to mess with Madison's head. For the first time, she felt unsure, and that terrified her. She kept walking, but her mind wasn't still. Something inside her had cracked. Madison Mitchell, the girl who had always ruled Brooklyn High without question, was now forced to face something she never expected. Doubt. And the worst part? It came from someone who hadn't even said a word. The longer she thought about it, the more the discomfort grew, like an itch under her skin she couldn't scratch. Aaliyah's silence wasn't just annoying, it felt like a direct threat. And Madison knew she couldn't let that feeling grow. If she didn't shut it down soon, everything she'd built could start slipping away. That was the moment Madison decided to up the stakes. If quiet bullying didn't work, she'd take it to the next level. Over the next few days, the teasing got more pointed, more aggressive. What started as whispers and side glances turned into obvious efforts to push Aaliyah out, to make her feel like she didn't belong. In every hallway, every class, Madison and her friends made sure Aaliyah knew she wasn't welcome. In class, Madison made sure to sit close. She and Chelsea would whisper just loud enough for Aaliyah to hear, spinning made-up stories and jokes about her. Each word was like a jab, sharp and cruel. But Aaliyah never flinched. Not once did she respond. She just kept her head down, calm and collected, refusing to let them get under her skin. And that only made Madison more frustrated. The more Aaliyah ignored her, the more desperate Madison became to break her. Then came gym class, Madison's favorite place to show off, and the perfect opportunity to strike harder. This was Zach Mitchell's territory. Her older brother, the school's football star, practically a celebrity in his own right. He was tall, athletic, and had the kind of confidence that made him seem untouchable. And no matter what, Zach always backed his sister. If Madison wanted someone put in their place, Zach didn't ask questions. He just made it happen. That day, while everyone was gathering on the field, Zach exchanged a glance with Luke Collins, his troublemaking sidekick. Luke lived for chaos and barely needed an excuse to stir things up. The second Zach gave the signal, Luke's crooked grin said it all. He was in. As class began, the students broke into groups to warm up. Aaliyah quietly found a spot away from everyone else, hoping to stay unnoticed. But Zach and Luke had other plans. They strolled over, standing right next to her like it was just another casual day. From across the field, Madison watched with a smug grin as Aaliyah's body tensed just slightly. But to her frustration, Aaliyah didn't react. She stared ahead, focused, refusing to give them the attention they wanted. Zach raised an eyebrow. He wasn't expecting that kind of calm, but he wasn't done yet. As the gym teacher blew the whistle for laps, Zach jogged ahead, then slowed down just enough to cut Aaliyah off. She had to swerve to avoid him, her foot slipping off rhythm for a second. She caught herself, didn't stumble, and kept going. But Zach kept at it, speeding up, slowing down, zigzagging just enough to throw her off again and again. Luke joined in right after, bumping her shoulder as he passed by, each time with just enough force to throw her balance off, but never enough to get noticed by the teacher. It was deliberate, petty, and cruel. But Aaliyah didn't stumble. Not really. And she never once looked at them. Madison watched all of it from a distance, her arms crossed, that same cold smile frozen on her face. But deep down, something about Aaliyah's quiet resilience still left her rattled. Because even surrounded, even under pressure, Aaliyah didn't break. And that scared Madison more than anything. Aaliyah felt every shove and bump clearly, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes stayed locked on the track ahead, refusing to give Zach, Luke, or Madison what they were so desperate to see: a reaction. She knew exactly what they were waiting for: a crack in her calm, a flash of anger, a moment of weakness. But Aaliyah wasn't going to give them that win. From across the field, Madison watched her like a hawk, studying every move. And the more Aaliyah held her ground, the more confused Madison became. That unbothered calm was starting to get under her skin. It made her feel like the control she thought she had was slipping. For a second, Madison wondered if maybe she'd underestimated Aaliyah. Maybe she wasn't as breakable as she looked. But almost immediately, Madison shook off the thought. Her pride wouldn't allow it. Losing wasn't an option. When gym class ended, Aaliyah walked off the field without a word, no scowl, no complaints, just that same calm presence. And it didn't go unnoticed. Students around her started whispering, comments full of curiosity, even a hint of respect. She didn't even react. That was kinda impressive. Madison heard every word, and each one felt like a tiny stab to her ego. She clenched her fists as the realization hit her. This wasn't just about bullying a new girl anymore. This was about power. Aaliyah wasn't staying silent because she was scared. She was staying silent to challenge everything Madison thought she owned. And that was a threat Madison couldn't ignore. Every time Aaliyah brushed off a snide comment or walked past a cruel prank without blinking, it chipped away at the image Madison had built. Brooklyn High had always belonged to her. She had fought hard to earn that untouchable status. But now, with every quiet act of resistance, Aaliyah was making it clear Madison's reign wasn't as solid as she thought. After a week of failed attempts to rattle Aaliyah, Madison knew she had to change tactics. Subtlety wasn't working. She needed something big, something public, a moment that would leave no doubt about who was in charge. And there was no better place than the cafeteria at lunch, the stage where reputations were made or destroyed. That day, Madison entered the lunchroom with her usual polished confidence. Chelsea and Olivia flanked her like always. Aaliyah, like every other day, had taken her seat in the far corner, the quiet spot, the place where she could be left alone. But today, Madison wasn't going to leave her alone. She walked to her usual table in the center, but her focus never left Aaliyah. Whispers floated around the room as people picked up on the tension. Everyone could sense something was about to happen. Carrying her tray, Madison got up and made her way toward Aaliyah's table, pretending like she was just passing by. But just as she approached, she picked up her pace and slammed her shoulder into Aaliyah, hard. The hit sent Aaliyah's tray flying, food crashing onto the floor, sauce splattering onto her white sneakers. The whole room froze at the sharp noise. It echoed in the sudden silence. Madison stopped right in front of her, flashing a smug grin. She shrugged dramatically and said loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Oops, didn't see you there." Her voice dripped with fake innocence. A few nervous laughs scattered through the cafeteria, like people didn't know if they should laugh or stay silent. Then everything went quiet again. All eyes were on Aaliyah, waiting. This had to be it, the moment she finally snapped. But Aaliyah didn't snap. She didn't yell. She didn't even bend down to clean up the mess. She just stood there, tall and steady, her posture strong and effortless. Her gaze met Madison's, calm, clear, and unreadable. And then, as if on cue, a soft, almost invisible smile touched Aaliyah's lips. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't smug. It was the kind of smile that said, "I see exactly what you're doing, and I'm still not afraid of you." Without a word, Aaliyah's silence said everything. And somehow, that quiet smile hit harder than any comeback ever could. That smile Aaliyah gave wasn't the kind of smile you'd expect from someone who'd just been humiliated. It was the kind of smile that came from someone who was fully in control, totally unfazed by childish stunts. Madison stared at her, and a chill crept up her spine. For the first time, real fear started to take root in her chest. There was something in Aaliyah's eyes, something deep, unreadable, almost unsettling, that made Madison feel like she was staring into something she couldn't explain. Her fingers twitched slightly. She couldn't tear her gaze away from Aaliyah, who stood there with quiet strength, her expression calm but piercing, like she'd seen straight through the game and wasn't impressed. That look, silent, composed, unshaken, wasn't just defiance. It was a challenge, and it made Madison question everything. For a split second, she wondered if maybe she'd completely misjudged this girl. Maybe Aaliyah wasn't fragile. Maybe she was stronger than anyone Madison had ever gone up against. But just as fast, Madison pushed the thought away. Her pride wouldn't let her accept it. Aaliyah didn't move. She just stood there, holding that same calm, almost icy smile, eyes locked on Madison. And that unspoken stare said more than words ever could. Madison finally looked away, turning quickly and heading back to her table, doing her best to hide the shake in her hand. Around her, whispers had already started. This time they were louder, braver. "Did you see that? Aaliyah's not scared at all. Madison, she looked kinda rattled." The words stabbed at Madison like needles. She clenched her jaw, trying to swallow the growing panic in her chest. She had wanted to put Aaliyah in her place, but now the entire plan had flipped on her. Instead of breaking Aaliyah, she had somehow made her more powerful, and Madison could feel her grip on Brooklyn High slipping. For the first time, Madison Mitchell wondered if she had picked the wrong person to mess with. Because Aaliyah didn't crumble under pressure. She didn't get scared. And that kind of strength, quiet, unshakable, was a kind Madison didn't know how to beat. But that powerful smile didn't last long. Once Aaliyah stepped outside the school gates, out of reach from the watching eyes and whispers, everything she'd held in came crashing down. Her stomach twisted, and the confidence she had shown moments earlier felt like a distant mask. Inside, there was a storm brewing. She never wanted to be dragged into this kind of situation again. She walked home slowly, heading toward the small house at the end of her quiet street. As soon as she stepped through the door, Aaliyah dropped onto the old, worn-out couch in the living room. She let out a long breath and covered her face with her hand, trying to fight back the weight pressing down on her chest. Her past, the one she tried so hard to bury, rushed back like a flood. She remembered exactly when things had spiraled out of control the last time. 2 years ago, at her school in Chicago, a girl named Erica had pushed her too far. For months, Erica had poked, mocked, and picked at her until something inside Aaliyah finally snapped. And in that one moment, all the discipline and control she'd worked for disappeared. She defended herself using the martial arts her dad had taught her, but she hadn't realized her own strength. Erica ended up in the hospital. It was serious. After that, Aaliyah had to leave, forced to start over, and she made a promise to herself that day. Never again. Never lose control. Never let anger win. But now, with Madison, that promise felt fragile. Each cruel word, each provocation was testing her limits. Aaliyah knew if this kept going, she might reach her breaking point again, and that terrified her more than anything else. As her mind spiraled, the front door opened. The sound of footsteps brought her back to the present. Her father, Marcus Carter, had returned from the gym. He was a former pro fighter, once on his way to the top, until an injury ended his career early. From the time she was little, he trained Aaliyah, not just to fight, but to control her mind and emotions. He always said martial arts wasn't about hitting back. It was about knowing when not to. Marcus stepped into the room, instantly sensing something was wrong. He dropped his gym bag, walked over, and sat next to her. "Talk to me," he said gently. "What happened at school?" Aaliyah opened her eyes, hesitating. Then she nodded and took a deep breath. Slowly, she told him everything. How it started on her first day, Madison's bullying, the way it escalated, and how it all boiled over in the cafeteria. She spoke quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. Marcus listened closely, not interrupting once. His face grew more serious with every detail. When she finally finished, Aaliyah lowered her head and whispered, barely audible, "I don't know how much longer I can keep it together. I'm scared I'm going to lose control again, just like before." Marcus placed a steady hand on Aaliyah's shoulder, his eyes full of warmth, but serious enough to make her stop and really listen. "Aaliyah," he said softly, "I get it. I know you're scared. You don't want to hurt anyone, and that's a good thing. But you can't control what other people do. The only thing you can control is how you choose to deal with it." Aaliyah looked up at him, her eyes clouded with doubt. "But if I react, if I fight back, what if I hurt someone again? I don't want to go through that all over again, Dad." Marcus shook his head slowly, his voice firm but gentle. "You've got it twisted, kiddo. You're not the one starting this. But sometimes, you've got to be the one to finish it. Martial arts isn't about violence. It's about knowing when and how to protect yourself. If you keep staying silent, pretending it doesn't bother you, people like Madison are going to think it's okay to keep going, that there's no line they can't cross." He paused, then leaned in slightly, his tone quieter but stronger. "I didn't teach you how to fight so you could hurt people. I taught you to be strong, to stay in control. I know you can keep yourself together. I trust that. But I also want you to know that being calm doesn't mean you have to stay quiet forever. Sometimes, standing up for yourself is the only way to make it stop." Aaliyah sat there, quietly taking in his words. Each sentence sank in deep, like a light clicking on inside her. He was right. Keeping her mouth shut wasn't fixing anything. If she wanted peace, she had to fight for it. Not with her fists, but with clarity and strength. Marcus pulled her into a hug, his voice soft in her ear. "I've always believed in you, Aaliyah. Your strength isn't in your punches, it's in knowing when to stand up and protect yourself." Aaliyah closed her eyes, a slow breath easing the tightness in her chest. Something inside her shifted. This wasn't a fight she had asked for, but she knew now she had to end it. And this time, she wouldn't run from it. The next morning, as Aaliyah walked into Brooklyn High, she could feel something in the air. The whispers, the stares. They were heavier than usual, charged with tension. Her steps were steady, but she could already sense something was waiting for her. And then she saw it. Taped to her locker was a small piece of paper. She pulled it off and read the words, written carefully but with clear provocation. "After school today, behind the gym, Be there if you don't want to be called a coward forever. Madison Mitchell. Aaliyah stared at the note for a long moment. Around her, students were clustered in little groups, pretending not to watch, but their eyes said otherwise. This wasn't just a note. It was a declaration, a public dare. Madison wasn't just trying to scare her. She was trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. Aaliyah folded the paper neatly and slipped it into her pocket. Her face didn't change. No fear, no confusion, just that same calm, unreadable expression. But inside, something was rising. She knew this wasn't something she could walk away from. Not this time. Madison wouldn't stop. She'd keep pushing until Aaliyah either gave in or pushed back. Down the hall, Aaliyah spotted her. Madison, walking with that same arrogant strut, flanked by Chelsea, Olivia, Zach, and Luke. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, slicing through the silence. Madison's eyes found Aaliyah's instantly. That usual smug smile crept onto her lips as she approached. She stopped right in front of Aaliyah and raised her voice just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I hope you show up," she said. "I'm getting sick of your fake tough act. Today, I'm going to show you where you really stand at this school." She leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice to a mocking whisper. "Unless, of course, you'd rather run away again, like you always do." Snickers came from behind her. Chelsea and Olivia giggled, feeding off the tension. The whole hallway seemed to hold its breath. Aaliyah didn't say anything at first. She just stared at Madison, her gaze sharp and unshaken. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, low, but filled with quiet strength. You could feel the power in it. She said, "You'll get your answer after school. I'll be there." With those 3 simple words, the hallway went dead silent. Everyone stopped. Madison blinked, caught off guard for a split second. She hadn't expected Aaliyah to say yes, at least not so easily. But she quickly masked her surprise with a smirk and a flick of her hair. "Good. Don't disappoint me, Aaliyah." She turned on her heel and strutted off, Chelsea and Olivia trailing behind. But inside, something stirred. That same calmness in Aaliyah, the thing Madison couldn't seem to shake, was messing with her again. It wasn't fear, it wasn't hesitation. It was something else, something Madison couldn't read, and she hated that. Still, there was no turning back now. Madison knew this had gone too far. Whatever happened after school would define everything. Her power, her reputation, her place at the top of Brooklyn High. As Madison's crew disappeared down the hallway, students slowly scattered, whispering among themselves. Aaliyah stood alone, taking in a long, quiet breath. She knew saying yes had crossed a line. There was no more hiding, no more avoiding. She remembered her father's words from the night before. "You didn't start this fight, but you have to be the one to end it." And now she understood what that meant. This wasn't just about standing up to Madison, it was about standing up for herself. Aaliyah's heart steadied. Her steps down the hallway felt heavier, but her shoulders were squared, her back straight. Something had shifted. For the first time, she wasn't walking away from fear, she was walking through it. That afternoon, the sky over Brooklyn was painted with a thick layer of gray, like even the weather could sense what was coming. Aaliyah stepped out of her last class with quiet resolve burning in her chest. As she walked through the halls, the sounds of lockers slamming and footsteps faded behind her. All she could hear was the echo of her own steps on the floor. She reached the corner of the building and saw the open space behind the gym. A group of students had already gathered, maybe 20 or so, talking in hushed tones, waiting for the show. At the center of it all stood Madison Mitchell, arms crossed like she owned the world. Chelsea, Olivia, Zach, and Luke stood right behind her, like her personal entourage. Madison's eyes locked onto Aaliyah the second she stepped into view. A sly grin tugged at her lips. She tilted her head and called out, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, well, look who decided to show up. I thought you'd be halfway home by now, little mouse." Some nervous laughs rippled through the crowd, but Aaliyah didn't flinch. She didn't speed up or slow down. She just walked forward at the same calm pace, eyes locked on Madison like she saw right through her. Madison's grin faltered for just a second. Something about Aaliyah's silence made her uneasy again. Still, she pushed the feeling down and raised her voice. "I'm going to make sure you never forget this day, Aaliyah. I'm going to put you in your place and remind everyone what happens when someone thinks they can challenge me." Madison stepped closer, the gap between them now barely 6 feet. The crowd held its breath. All eyes were glued to the two girls, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Aaliyah didn't blink. Her voice came out steady, low, and cutting straight through the noise. "Madison, you're going to regret this." That one line landed like a thunderclap. The crowd went still. No more whispers, no more giggles, just silence. Madison's smile twitched, and she furrowed her brow. Something about the way Aaliyah said it, so calm, so sure, hit a nerve. She wanted to shake it off, but it clung to her like a shadow. "Oh, I'm terrified," she sneered, forcing a fake laugh. She glanced behind her and gave a quick nod. Zach and Luke stepped forward, flanking her like bodyguards. Zach stood tall, broad shoulders squared, his arms crossed over his chest like he was ready to step into a fight ring. Luke wore a crooked grin, clearly enjoying the build-up. Madison crossed her arms again and lifted her chin, but deep down she could feel it. The control she once held so tightly was slipping inch by inch. And Aaliyah? She hadn't even moved. Luke, on the other hand, wore a crooked grin, clearly excited at the idea of jumping into a fight. He looked like he couldn't wait for things to get physical. Madison figured just having her crew back her up would be enough to scare Aaliyah off, that the pressure alone would make her back down without anyone having to throw a punch. But she miscalculated. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She didn't show a hint of fear. She just stood there, still and silent, like she'd already seen how everything was going to play out. Her calmness made Madison uneasy. It was that same eerie, unreadable calm that had been getting under her skin from the beginning. She felt herself getting irritated, confused, even threatened. "Enough, Aaliyah!" Madison snapped, stepping forward, her eyes flashing with frustration. "Who do you think you are, standing here acting like you're above me?" Aaliyah looked straight into Madison's eyes, and in that moment, everything else disappeared. She remembered her father's voice echoing in her mind. "You don't start the fight, but you have to be the one to end it." Her voice was steady, each word slow and deliberate. "I warned you, but if you still want to do this, then be ready to deal with what comes next." Madison felt something shift in her chest. That confidence in Aaliyah's voice, it wasn't forced, it was real. Still, she rolled her eyes and turned toward the crowd, raising her voice to cover up the flicker of nerves crawling under her skin. "Hear that? She still thinks she can scare me." Laughter broke out again, but it was thinner now, unsure. Even the crowd could feel the change in the air. The energy had shifted, and suddenly people weren't so sure Madison was in control anymore. Aaliyah didn't move. Her stance didn't waver. She stood with a quiet strength, no longer trying to avoid this confrontation, no longer afraid of what came next. She didn't want to fight, but she wasn't about to let herself get walked over anymore. The tension was thick as the crowd circled around the field behind the school. You could practically feel it hanging in the air. Every student watching knew this moment was going to change something. Aaliyah stood still, her breathing calm, her eyes locked on Madison with laser focus. She wasn't backing down, Not now, not ever again. Madison, tense and cornered by the eyes watching her, refused to show weakness. She gave Zack a quick glance. He didn't hesitate. Zack stepped forward, towering over most of the students, his build intimidating, his expression smug. He didn't say a word, just gave Aaliyah a cocky look and raised his hand, ready to shove her the way he had done to countless opponents on the football field. But Zack made one big mistake. He underestimated her. The moment his arm moved toward her, Aaliyah reacted. In one smooth, controlled motion, she stepped to the side, caught his wrist, and used his own strength against him. In a split second, she twisted his arm, shifted her weight, and flipped his body over. The impact when Zack hit the ground echoed like thunder. The entire crowd gasped. He lay there, wide-eyed, trying to understand how he'd just been thrown like a rag doll. Aaliyah didn't even look shaken. She hadn't broken a sweat. Nobody could believe it. Zack Mitchell, the football star, taken down in one move by the quiet girl everyone thought would crumble. Madison froze, her face draining of color. The fear she'd been pushing down suddenly bubbled to the surface. She was losing control, fast. Before anyone could react, Luke jumped forward, face twisted in anger. He didn't wait, didn't think. He charged at Aaliyah, fist clenched. But Aaliyah didn't panic. She moved with the same calm precision she had trained for since she was a child. She sidestepped him effortlessly, her body flowing like water. As he stumbled past her, she grabbed his wrist, pivoted, and twisted his arm behind his back. With a quick flick of her body, she locked him in place. Luke cried out, pain shooting through his shoulder. He tried to break free, but the more he struggled, the tighter the hold got. Within seconds, he was forced to drop to one knee, humiliated and in pain. Aaliyah didn't hurt him any further. She didn't need to. Her message was already loud and clear. She wasn't someone to mess with. The crowd stood frozen, watching in stunned silence. No one was laughing anymore. In that instant, the entire crowd froze, eyes wide with disbelief. Nobody could wrap their heads around what they'd just seen. Aaliyah calmly let go of Luke's arm and stepped back, her face as steady and cold as ever, her gaze fixed on Madison like a silent reminder. "I'm not someone you can break." For the first time in her life, Madison felt real fear crawl up her spine. The power she'd always taken for granted, the control she used to bend people to her will, was slipping right through her fingers. Zack and Luke, the ones she counted on most, the ones who were supposed to intimidate and protect her, were now on the ground, humiliated by the very girl they thought they could crush. Madison's confidence started to crack. Her posture was still upright, but the panic in her eyes gave her away. Chelsea and Olivia hovered behind her, frozen in place, trading quick, nervous glances. No one dared speak, but the murmurs rising around them said it all. People weren't seeing Aaliyah as a victim anymore. They were seeing her as someone who just flipped the whole script. Aaliyah stood tall, taking in a deep breath, steadying herself. She didn't feel proud, she didn't feel victorious, but she knew deep down this had to happen. She didn't want to hurt anyone, but she wasn't going to let them walk all over her anymore. Madison stayed planted in front of her, trying to hide the fear with her usual smugness, but it wasn't working. Her voice shook, her anger now mixed with desperation. "You think you won?" Aaliyah looked her straight in the eyes, her voice cutting through the air like glass. "I warned you. You picked this fight, not me." The words hit like a slap. Madison blinked, stunned, like the truth had finally hit her square in the chest. She had no comeback, no way to save face. All the power she'd held for so long, gone. And everyone saw it. Aaliyah stepped back, still holding Madison's gaze for a moment before turning around. The crowd was dead silent, watching her every move. She didn't know what would happen next, but it didn't matter. She had already won by refusing to be afraid. Then, out of nowhere, a piercing scream shattered the silence. Madison. Her face twisted with rage and humiliation, her pride completely shattered, she snapped. She wasn't thinking about reputation or consequences anymore. She just charged. A desperate, messy attempt to take something back, to hurt the person who had just destroyed everything she'd built. But Aaliyah had been trained too well to ever be caught off guard. The moment Madison's hand touched her back, Aaliyah reacted in a flash. She turned, sidestepped, and grabbed Madison's wrist in one smooth, controlled motion. With a slight twist and pull, she threw Madison off balance, nearly sending her to the ground. But she didn't let her fall. Instead, Aaliyah held her there, helpless, humiliated, and completely under her control. Madison's eyes widened in panic as she stared down at the ground, body trembling, breath unsteady. In that moment, she wasn't the queen bee of Brooklyn High. She wasn't feared or admired. She was just a girl who'd pushed too far and lost everything. Aaliyah leaned in, her voice a quiet whisper, but sharp as a knife. "You were never strong, and you'll never control me." Those words cut deeper than anything Madison had ever felt. They pierced through every lie she'd told herself, every ounce of fake confidence she'd used to mask her insecurity. Her legs shook as Aaliyah slowly let her go, and Madison stumbled back, barely able to stand on her own. She looked around, searching for something, someone, to back her up. But the crowd wasn't with her anymore. She saw pity in some faces, disappointment in others, but the admiration, the fear, gone. Chelsea and Olivia silently stepped away, not daring to meet her eyes. Even Zach and Luke, now back on their feet, kept their heads down, offering no support, no loyalty, just shame. And in that moment, Madison Mitchell realized the truth. Her reign was over. They had all walked away from her when she needed them the most. Madison stood there, feeling an overwhelming wave of loneliness crash over her. For so long, she'd believed power was everything, that as long as people feared and followed her, she'd always be on top. But now, that illusion had completely crumbled, leaving behind an emptiness she didn't know how to handle. Tears began to sting the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to break down in front of everyone. Not here. Not now. Across from her, Aaliyah stood still, her expression calm and steady, her eyes focused on Madison. There was no joy in her face, no smugness, just quiet finality. She hadn't wanted to embarrass Madison, but she knew this had to happen. Someone had to show that bullying had consequences, and that the ones who stayed silent could still be strong. Madison slowly stepped back, each movement heavier than the last, like her legs were made of stone. Everyone was watching, every step, every breath. And when she finally turned and rushed off school grounds, it wasn't just defeat, it was collapse. Her power, her reputation, everything she had built over years was gone in a single afternoon, and she knew deep down there was no getting it back. As her figure disappeared down the street, the crowd around the schoolyard started buzzing again, but this time it was different. They weren't whispering about Madison's control or threats. They were talking about Aaliyah, with genuine respect, with awe. Aaliyah looked around at the crowd for a moment, then exhaled softly. She had done what her dad had told her to do, end the battle, clearly and without causing any more harm than necessary. She hadn't done this for attention or revenge. She'd done it because it was the only way to finally stop the cycle. She turned and walked away, leaving behind a schoolyard that no longer felt hostile. She knew this moment wasn't just a personal victory. It was a message to everyone watching. Real strength doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from standing firm, holding your ground, and refusing to be broken. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows and lit up the hallways of Brooklyn High. But the vibe in the building was completely different. If yesterday had been the collapse of Madison Mitchell's rule, today was the start of something new. The old pecking order had been wiped out, and the school was figuring out what came next. Madison walked down the hallway slowly, her heart heavy and her mind spinning. Every step felt unfamiliar, like the ground she once ruled had turned into unfamiliar territory. The eyes that once followed her with admiration or fear now barely glanced at her, or worse, looked through her entirely. Some eyes carried pity. Others avoided her completely. She kept her gaze low, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. The whispers still floated around her, but they no longer carried weight. They weren't talking about her power or style or dominance. They were whispers of curiosity, mixed with fake sympathy. It hit her hard. Everything she had worked so hard to control had fallen apart overnight. Now she was just another face in the hallway, a shadow of who she used to be. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the hallway, Aaliyah entered the building with the same quiet presence she'd always had. There was no gloating, no need for celebration. To her, it wasn't about winning. It was about being able to finally breathe without fear. She never wanted the spotlight. She just wanted peace. But the students who once ignored her now looked at her differently. There was a new energy in the way they glanced her way. Admiration, curiosity, respect. Some nodded as she passed by, while others offered small smiles. Aaliyah returned each one with a soft, genuine smile of her own. But she had no interest in taking Madison's place. She didn't want to rule anything. All she wanted was to live without fear, to be seen, respected, and left alone to be herself. Not far away, Madison stood at her locker, hands trembling, her palms damp with sweat as she caught the whispers all around her. "Can you believe it? She really lost everything. I never thought I'd see her like this. From queen bee to nobody in one day." Each word hit like a punch to the chest. She could barely breathe. The world she'd ruled with confidence now looked at her with disappointment, or worse, indifference. Chelsea and Olivia passed by without even glancing at her. No smile, no wave, just silence. Even Zach, her brother, who had always been by her side, stood off to the side, watching her with quiet shame. He didn't say a word, and that's when Madison finally understood. The power she thought was unshakable had never really been hers. It had always depended on fear, and the second that fear disappeared, so did everything else. At the same time, Luke, once the loudest troublemaker and always eager to stir the pot, now kept his distance from Madison, acting like he didn't even know her. It was painfully clear to Madison now. The power she'd leaned on for so long had never been real. It was built on fear, on fake loyalty. And now that it was gone, all that remained was isolation and shame. As Madison's fall became more obvious, Aaliyah found herself growing uncomfortable. She had never wanted Madison to feel the kind of loneliness she once lived with. Even after everything Madison had done to her, Aaliyah couldn't ignore how familiar that look of emptiness was. She knew what it felt like to be cast out, to be invisible. But she also knew this wasn't her doing. Madison had chosen her path. She had built her world on controlling others, and this was simply the result. Aaliyah couldn't fix it, and she didn't want to get involved in another power game. She had no desire to become the next queen of the school. That was never the goal. Aaliyah walked the halls quietly, eyes forward, avoiding attention even as it chased her. Whether she wanted it or not, she had become something new at Brooklyn High, someone students looked up to. A symbol of what it meant to stand your ground without turning into the thing you were standing against. Every step she took echoed with quiet strength. Real power, she'd learned, didn't come from fear or control. It came from within. from knowing who you are and refusing to let others change that. While Madison clung to the last fragments of her former image, Aaliyah simply kept walking, grounded and unshaken. That day marked a turning point at Brooklyn High, the fall of false authority and the quiet rise of something much more meaningful. No one could say for sure what the future would hold. But one thing was clear: the school would never be the same again. Over the next few days, life at Brooklyn High slowly returned to normal on the surface, but something had undeniably changed. What happened had left a lasting impression. The old rules no longer applied. Madison Mitchell was no longer the girl everyone feared, and Aaliyah Carter, who never wanted the spotlight, had unintentionally become the face of quiet strength and real courage. During lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with whispers, students still processing everything. Aaliyah, as usual, sat alone at her corner table, unfazed by the curious glances. Not far from her, Madison sat too, but unlike before, the tables around her were empty. She kept her eyes down, staring at her untouched food, trying to block out the sting of being completely alone. Aaliyah noticed from across the room. There was no satisfaction in what she saw, only empathy. She knew too well what that kind of silence felt like. After a moment, she stood up, picked up her tray, and quietly walked over to Madison's table. The entire cafeteria fell into an eerie silence. Everyone stared, holding their breath. Madison looked up slowly, stunned to see Aaliyah standing in front of her. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. She was frozen, unable to move, unsure of what was about to happen. Aaliyah looked her straight in the eyes. Her expression wasn't angry, not proud or smug. It was calm, grounded, and strong, in a way that made it impossible to look away. "It's over," Aaliyah said, her voice soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not here to fight. I just hope you're done with all of this, too." The words echoed across the room like a quiet bell. Madison didn't respond. She couldn't, but she understood exactly what Aaliyah meant. This wasn't about victory or revenge. It was about ending something that had gone on for too long. Without another word, Aaliyah turned and walked away, leaving Madison with her thoughts and the crowd's hushed stares. There was no pride in her step, no gloating, just quiet dignity, the kind that didn't need approval to be real. Madison remained seated, unable to move, the weight of everything sinking in deeper. Around her, students slowly returned to their conversations, letting the moment pass, leaving Madison alone in a way she had never experienced before. She sat in silence, knowing that the power she once believed could never be taken from her had vanished, and with it, the image she'd spent years trying to maintain. Outside the cafeteria, Aaliyah stepped into the sunlight. It felt warm on her skin, comforting in a way it hadn't felt in a long time. She breathed in deeply, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. Life at Brooklyn High had changed, not just for her, but for everyone who had once kept their heads down, afraid to speak. And Aaliyah knew this was just the beginning. But more importantly, Aaliyah had come to understand the real meaning of power and what it truly means to be strong. Real power isn't about controlling others, tearing people down, or trying to prove you're better. It's not about being feared or about winning at someone else's expense. True strength is about mastering yourself, staying grounded, keeping your dignity, and remaining calm even when everything around you is trying to shake you. When Aaliyah walked away that day, no one questioned her silence anymore. No one mistook her calm for weakness. The students at Brooklyn High finally saw her for who she was, someone who never chased power the way Madison did. Aaliyah wasn't trying to rise to the top. She just wanted to live in a world where people respected each other, where no one had to suffer to feed someone else's ego. That message didn't fade after the confrontation. It spread, slowly but deeply, throughout the school. The students who had once stayed silent, laughed along, or simply watched from the sidelines began to reflect. Things were changing. Brooklyn High was no longer a place ruled by fear or intimidation. Now, there was a new understanding that true strength lies in standing up for your values and never letting anyone take away your voice or your worth. The story of Aaliyah and Madison became something no one could forget. It wasn't just about a fight. It was a lesson, a reminder that no matter where you are or what you're up against, the most important thing you can do is stay true to yourself, to face your fears head-on without losing who you are in the process. And that is real power. Aaliyah's story showed all of us that strength doesn't come from putting others down. It comes from having the courage to rise above, to hold on to your self-respect, and to walk away with your head high no matter what. Now think about it. If you were in Aaliyah's shoes, what would you have done? How would you have handled the pressure? The bullying? If this story meant something to you, take a second to like it, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep spreading stories that lift people up and remind us what real strength looks like. Thanks for sticking with us and for listening.